Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dangerous Women Leading Onward, powered by FinTech TV. I'm Pat Mitchell, and my guest today is someone who knows a lot about being in dangerous situations on the front lines of war, bringing a deeper understanding of complex conflicts as CNN's chief international correspondent, and now as the host of CNN's Amanpour and PBS's Amanpour and Company. Please welcome Christiane Amanpour. Hello, Christiane.
Pat, it's so good to see you.
Always great to see you. And, just saying your name, Christiane, conjures up for millions of people in the world a very dangerous situation. You on the front lines in front of in the Bosnian War or many other violent conflicts around the world.
Bosnia's capital, Sarajevo, was under attack. The Bosnian Serbs shelled the city, cut the power, and blocked the roads. Snipers were everywhere.
It may already be too late to save tens of thousands of people.
I was there, reporting on the siege, a ruthless 3-year attempt to drive the Muslims out of their multi-ethnic city.
Talking calmly to the camera while we hear bullets and bombs going off nearby, certainly a situation that feels fearful and dangerous. And I always think of what must be going on in your head to balance the real fears of real dangers with your passionate commitment to get as close as you need to get the full story. How do you do that balance?
Well, for a long time, and I used to kind of laugh, when people would see me coming, like whether it was a local official or whoever it was, they would think, oh my goodness, my country is about to get bombed. What is she doing in my country? So that was always a little bit sort of troublesome, because I thought, wow, I'm the harbinger of, bad news. But then I thought, well, no, actually, I hope they look at it also as a little bit of fear, because I'm going to come and tell the truth and, shine that light on the people who need a voice and who need the platform. So I think in terms of the fear and what goes through your head when you go to these places is you don't feel the fear at the time. I mean, now I can speak in retrospect to an extent, and sometimes I wonder how I did it for all those years. And I think the truth is, at the time, you're not feeling it. Yes, there's nerves. Yes, there's adrenaline. Yes, there's all that fight and flight that comes into it, because you have to protect yourself. You have to be smart. You can't overdo it on the risk. But you do have to be there. And I'm a strong believer, because, unfortunately, reporting has become too much like an armchair exercise, too many talking heads, not enough respect and space given to reporters in the field. And the great Robert Capa, I think it was him who used to say, if the shot isn't good enough, you're not close enough. That's obviously for a camera person, and clearly the camera people, get much closer. But I believe that too. If the story isn't visceral enough, if you can't see the whites of their eyes, if you can't, take their pulse, if you can't feel their emotion, you're not close enough. And I always felt that I had to get that close.
And now you are up close and personal, seeing the whites of their eyes, as it were, in the interview format of both the show for CNN International as well as the PBS program. But you're still asking the tough questions. You're still going for the truth. You're still facing, the real danger that someone will be offended or not like the direction. But how different is that for you as a journalist?
It's different because when I was in the field, I didn't have to worry about what the leaders would think of me. I was literally just concentrated on getting the story of the ordinary man and woman, the ordinary kids, the ordinary people who made up these extraordinary, dangerous and difficult crises, the wars, the pestilence and the plagues that I would cover. And I was really just intent on going to the heart of the matter. Now, more and more, I've had to hold leaders accountable for what, they have done to the people, both bad, but hey, sometimes even good. One of the things I've learned is not to just be a knee-jerk cynic. And I do believe in good leadership. And I think certainly we have witnessed in this pandemic some very good leadership, mostly it has to be said, and I'm thrilled about it, by the countries which have been led by women. And I think you also have to, certainly in my position now, with a platform, with the ability to talk to people, you can't just be negative, negative, negative Nelly. When there's good stuff, you have to be able to also show that, because that is the reality. And you can't terrify people 100% of the time. You can't just be, the voice of doom and gloom. And without being Pollyanna, it's important to be able to also see, good leadership and the progress that's made.
And we have all witnessed that, as you say, in the countries that are led by women doing better, by and large, in the pandemic. But you've been focusing a lot in the talk programs on women and women's leadership. What are you learning about what makes women different kinds of leaders?
Well, I just interviewed, in fact, for my latest program, Julia Gillard, the former Prime Minister of Australia, the first female Prime Minister of Australia, and Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is Nigerian. She was one of the first female, top ministers in Nigeria. She's had many, important jobs, and she is, in fact, the first female, first African leader of the World Trade Organization, a big global position. And I obviously asked them that because they've both written a book. It's called, Lessons in Leadership, Real Lives, Real Lessons about Women. And they took a number of female elected officials and they asked them real questions about their lives, their struggle to the top. What happens when they get to the top? How do you balance leadership and being a real human being? Leadership and family, leadership and empathy, leadership and, communication, the things that maybe don't seem obvious, but they said, and I do believe this, that and there have been studies done actually since COVID began, which show that the way the women immediately listen to the scientific expertise, were able to go out to their country folk and say, this is going to be hard. This is not going to be easy. There's no silver bullet. And yet we have to do this as a community and as a group for the good of our nation and for the good of the world. And these two ladies believe that, these women who are honest with their public and with their communications, or any leader who's honest, gets a level of trust from their people. So there's the trust factor. Then there's the go hard and fast and just get on with it factor that women tend to do. Then there's the empathy, of course. Then there's the willingness to be inclusive. It's all about just getting things done and being inclusive and not being egotistical to think that I have to put my stamp of success on this, otherwise it's not going to be, it's not going to work. So there are a lot of things. And Julia Gillard had a great phrase. She said, and she is really a pistol. I mean, this woman is a pistol. And if anybody hasn't seen it, I strongly advise them to see somewhere around 2000, I can't remember when it was, mid 2000s, the slapdown she gave to the leader of the opposition, who had been sexist and misogynistic towards her.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not. Well, I hope the Leader of the Opposition has got a piece of paper and he is writing out his resignation. Because if he wants to know what misogyny looks like in modern Australia, he doesn't need a motion in the House of Representatives. He needs a mirror. That's what he needs.
She said, we've had some of these male leaders who've tried to out-swagger the coronavirus, the pandemic. It just doesn't work like that. So I think there's a lot of reasons why women leaders are effective on many, many levels, particularly in situations like this.
Well, as you know, I completely agree with that. And in fact, wrote about it in my book, Becoming a Dangerous Woman. And you agreed to be interviewed in that book because the purpose of the book was twofold: redefine dangerous beyond the ever-present danger you discussed and we know is present in the lives of women and men and children everywhere, but to redefine it as the willingness to take a risk and stand up and speak up and show up, what you have done your whole life. Christiane. And when I ask you in the book, did you consider yourself a dangerous woman? You had an interesting perspective on what it meant to you to be dangerous. To remind you, you said it's what you have to do to balance the global scales of justice. Where are we now in that balance?
Oof, I think I did this interview with you probably in the last 4 years or so. And I think we've been through a hugely dispiriting political experiment over the last 4 years. Brexit in the UK, Donald Trump and populism in the United States, the way populism and nationalism became suddenly in vogue in so many parts of the world. I really do believe there's a retreat from that now. There's no doubt in my mind that populism in Europe is on the wane. Certainly that kind of, aggressive nationalism as a whole, as a continent-wide project is, I believe, on the wane. I think that in the United States, you've seen, with your own eyes, you, the American people, cast your vote, and you spoke loud and clear.
It's so encouraging to hear this perspective from you, Christiane, because you have this global perspective that very few of us have. And you are saying it's time to put aside cynicism in the midst of all these huge global threats that continue.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't put aside cynicism when it's required. But for me, cynicism is much more of a hard-charging, direct holding to account. I find cynicism very corrosive. And I find cynicism becomes a reflex action and a knee-jerk action. And it's a cover for seriousness or real research or real digging deep. It's just treat everything like it's, somehow boring or it's kind of annoying. Reflex, knee-jerk cynicism is lazy.
And we're seeing a lot of it among journalists and media institutions in the world today. And that has led us to one of the biggest players for many in many of these global challenges, misinformation, of the lack of truth and information you can rely on. What is the role of journalism and media, and how is that evolving?
Somebody asked me the other day, what do you feel is your biggest competition? And I thought, and I said, what the biggest competition for me right now is the lack of trust in fact and truth. Again, I believe that the latest leaders who've been elected, certainly in the United States and in other parts of the world, have promised to rededicate themselves and their administrations to the norms of truth and fact and memory and history and all those things that we absolutely must have to have functioning democracies. I've always said when people ask me, the difference between, and certainly I've witnessed it, so I know what I'm talking about, the difference between truth and lies is the difference between authoritarianism or dictatorship and democracy and freedom. On this side, you can get away with just conspiracy theories and lies and create a dictatorship and an authoritarian landscape. But if you have truth, if you have fact, if you have, curiosity and the ability to, hold accountable and fact check for yourself and really have that information at your fingertips, then you are free. And then you have a chance at democracy. So I think we have to be super, super aware right now that it's just not okay to pay attention to all these rabbit holes and to even as a curiosity to make excursion down these rabbit holes. We've done it enough. Now we all need to come back and really value and respect facts and truth. And we know where we can get it. There are many, many news organizations or think tanks or scholarly enterprises, universities. I mean, the world is full of facts and truth. So there's no excuse for us and anybody else not to find it and not to seek it.
Thinking back of how much you have seen and witnessed in the world, and that gives you a longer view on how the arc of justice can bend. This program is seen in Africa and India and in the Middle East. And I'm wondering if there are experiences that you've seen and witnessed and documented and reported that are encouraging for us in such times.
Well, I've spent a lot of time in all the places you mentioned, particularly in the Middle East and Africa, and I have done some, really interesting in-depth work in India for certain series that I've done. Just take it away from politics. I did a series called Sex and Love Around the World that was really my way of trying to explore for women, young women, how to access their own right to intimacy, their right to love, their right to sexual satisfaction within, the different countries that they happen to live in. One of the countries was India. I spent time in Delhi. One of the countries was in Africa. I spent time in Ghana, and I was also in China and in Japan. I was in Beirut in the Middle East, and I was in Berlin. All this to say that I really have found, despite many patriarchal societies, in all of these countries, it's not just in the obvious culprits, but even in Japan, it's a patriarchal society. Women are expected to behave in a certain way. There are, like the sort of tunnel vision as to how women are expected to behave. And when they stray, they risk the opprobrium of their families, their society, their country, social media, dare I say. And I found it really interesting because I could see that young women will no longer tolerate this wholesale denial, not just of their political rights and their educational rights and their working rights, but of their interior lives. The attempt to dominate not even just their bodies, just their minds, just their ideas about being happy, about their right to be a full human being. I asked a young Afghan refugee who had come to Germany and was in what they called a camp, but it was in a school that had been given over for this purpose in Berlin. I asked this young Afghan refugee, I said, what makes you happy? The translator said to me, before translating it to her, Christiane, that's a very dangerous question for somebody like, this person. She doesn't have the right to be happy. She's got her mother-in-law on this side. She's got her arranged marriage on that side. And she doesn't even know what it means to be happy. That was just such an eye-opener for me, And so I think that I've seen a lot of progress and a lot of, women and young girls who really feel now that they want to take their destiny in their own hands.
So let me ask you to dig a little bit into that interior space and see if you can help us understand what in your childhood and your life and your colleagues and where does that sense of the commitment to the truth and adjusting the global scales of balance, but also just simply the bravery and the courage to pursue work you want to do?
It must have come to me, as I was, doing it, because I don't know. All I can tell you is that I have a very impressive and influential mother who was incredibly brave in her own youth and who went on adventures for a young English girl that you could barely imagine would have been possible. And we just always took it as, oh, those are mommy's stories, and that was really interesting, and wow, mom, but I never really internalized it. But now when I try to figure out where did I get maybe some of that daring, some of that willingness to, get out of my comfort zone, I really do think it's probably from my mother. Then it was a question of being forced, because I had, revolution happened in my country, and I was forced to leave Iran and to, again, leave a major comfort zone, be a kind of a refugee, around the world, seek my fortune and my survival elsewhere. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't obvious being an Iranian in the West, being an Iranian in America. It wasn't at that time when the hostages were taken and the Ayatollahs were not the popular, to say the least, not the most popular regime in the West. you know, a girl trying to make it in what was a man's world, as you know. I just did it. I just knew what I wanted to do. I just knew what I wanted to do, and I just did it. And I was very, very lucky. I was lucky that I was not sexually harassed or abused, but I believe I was sexually aggressed. I believe enough men showed anger and a lack of empathy and understanding and a who do you think you are sort of towards me. And I think that I found that uncomfortable, but I certainly powered through. And now I think, because I'm definitely from a generation that had to deal with that, but I had many people who paved the way for me. Today's younger generation, whether it's a leader, you know, who's barely 40 years old, like Jacinda Ardern, or whoever it might be, you know, women used to think they had to be able to say they could have it all, that they had to be able to prove that they could do everything here and now, 100%, 1,000%, because we'd had to prove that back then. But now, luckily, women don't have to do that anymore. That burden has gone. Women can be women. Women can take time to be mothers. They can take time to work. They can be elected officials. They can be sport. They can do it all and not necessarily feel like they have to do it all at the same time. And I think that's really important. And women can show vulnerability. They can show empathy. They can show who they are today. And that, I think, is the great, great advance for women of this generation.
It's women's opportunity to claim the moral high ground, to bring all the things that we experience. What an encouraging note to end our conversation on. Thank you, Christiane, for being brave enough and willing to take the risk to go in the dangerous places in the world, to bring us the truth. And truth is necessary for a just, sustainable, and equitable world.